Judge orders Ashton Kutcher arrest after Kash Patel releases evidence in Diddy's trial. Manhattan actor Ashton Kutcher took the witness stand in a federal courtroom, delivering a critical blow to Sean "Diddy" Combs, who faces allegations including sex trafficking, coercion, and violent abuse. The case, now in its 10th day, took a dramatic turn with Kutcher's appearance. Combs, widely known as a dominant figure in American hip-hop, is accused of building and protecting an abusive system using wealth and influence. Kutcher described a toxic environment where silence was enforced and loyalty exploited. "You weren't a guest, you were a tool," he said. The content below contains detailed descriptions of alleged sexual abuse, coercion threats, and serious violations of the law. Some of the content may be disturbing or inappropriate for minors. Please proceed with caution. All content presented is based on publicly available documents from U.S. federal court, sworn testimony from witnesses, and information verified by reputable sources such as the inner-city press, national media, and law enforcement. All details are compiled for informational purposes to raise public awareness and to accurately reflect the actual events of the case. The testimony included descriptions of private parties guarded by security, young people pressured into obedience, and individuals who disappeared after resisting. One former assistant named in court reportedly expressed fear before being institutionalized and then vanished from public life. Kutcher didn't just offer commentary, he described patterns, locations, dates, and names. His words cut through the courtroom silence. "I didn't want to be here," he told the court, "but I can't stay quiet. Not anymore." His voice was steady. The gravity was not lost on anyone present. He testified about documents he was once asked to sign, NDAs, that extended far beyond standard business agreements. "It wasn't about protecting innovation or creative work," he said. "It was about sealing silence, about threats that weren't written but implied in every interaction." Kutcher went on to describe meetings held in hotel rooms where security detail wasn't for the guests' protection, it was to ensure no one left early. "There were places you knew not to speak," he said. "And once you were there, you knew something was wrong." He confirmed being part of a list, unofficial, unwritten, but maintained among Hollywood insiders. People who knew, people who were warned. "I ignored that list for years," he said. "Now I wish I hadn't." The defense attempted to paint Kutcher's testimony as hearsay and speculation. But every time they objected, the prosecution countered with corroboration photos, travel logs, financial statements. The judge repeatedly ruled in favor of allowing the evidence. Within hours, the public impact began unfolding. Online forums were flooded with new claims. Former collaborators of Combs began reaching out to journalists anonymously. Some verified key parts of Kutcher's account. Others hinted that more would surface soon. Celebrities removed social media content linked to Combs. Legal experts called it a strategic distancing. "They know what's coming," one said. "They're getting ahead of it." A second witness, previously unannounced, approached federal agents during recess. That individual was described as visibly nervous, carrying a thick envelope and requesting anonymity. Sources say what was submitted corroborates elements of Kutcher's claims about coercion, financial manipulation, and the use of private properties for controlled gatherings. Later that afternoon, a former music executive walked into the courtroom unaccompanied. She delivered sealed materials to the clerk's desk with a single line. "This isn't just one man's truth, it's ours." By early evening, hashtags like Diddy trial, Sir, testify to truth, and Sir, Kutcher broke the room dominated social media. Streaming services quietly delisted several collaborative works associated with Combs. Media outlets shifted tone, referring to the trial as a reckoning, not just for one man, but for an entire generation of enablers. Editorials compared the moment to past seismic collapses of power in the entertainment and media world. "This has echoes of Weinstein, but it's deeper because the culture of silence was broader," one commentator said. As night fell, Department of Justice officials confirmed that 3 sealed indictments had been approved and were awaiting execution. They declined to name those targeted. Back in the courtroom, Judge Hammond addressed the defense's last-minute appeal to strike portions of the testimony. "Truth is no longer being sought," he said. "It's arriving uninvited and undeniable." Combs sat motionless. Kutcher walked out without looking back. He didn't need to. The room had changed. Manhattan. The aftermath of Ashton Kutcher's testimony triggered a chain reaction that rocked the entertainment industry's inner sanctum. The federal trial against Sean Diddy Combs was no longer just a courtroom event. It had become a cultural rupture. Within 24 hours, legal shockwaves stretched from New York to Los Angeles. At the center was Combs, now rebranded in public discourse from music mogul to alleged predator. His legal team, previously confident in a strategy of discrediting witnesses, scrambled to contain damage. Anonymous sources close to the defense said late-night calls to entertainment lawyers. Agents and crisis firms didn't stop until dawn. By morning, 3 new witnesses had come forward, all unannounced. 2 were industry professionals with direct ties to events mentioned by Kutcher. The third was a former security contractor who presented logs of unauthorized surveillance blacklists and internal memos allegedly issued by Combs's inner circle. Court documents obtained by inner-city press revealed sealed subpoenas delivered to multiple record labels, luxury venues, and financial institutions. Prosecutors were expanding the scope, moving beyond allegations of abuse into a broader investigation of organized misconduct and obstruction. Social media was relentless. Public sentiment had shifted decisively. Influencers, artists, and even former collaborators posted statements distancing themselves. Streaming platforms adjusted featured playlists. Combs's music lost 11 million monthly plays in less than 48 hours. Combs arrived at the courthouse wearing dark sunglasses and flanked by a visibly reduced entourage. Absent were several public figures who had supported him during earlier hearings. Inside the courtroom, his posture remained rigid, but his attorneys whispered more frequently. One reporter noted, "They're not arguing, they're triaging." Day 11 opened with testimony from the former security contractor. Under oath, he described years of enforced silence. There were protocols, he said. Phones were stored, cameras covered, guests were told they were being watched even when they weren't. He alleged that Combs maintained a private surveillance archive stored offshore. When asked how he knew, the witness presented an email chain between tech consultants discussing encryption layers and remote wipe protocols. The courtroom murmured. The judge asked for a brief recess to allow technical advisors from the DOJ to review. Back on the record, prosecutors revealed they had obtained a court order to access cloud-stored data believed to contain years of digital evidence. A lead prosecutor addressed the court. "This isn't just about who was in the room. It's about who controlled the rooms and who erased what happened inside them." Combs's attorneys protested the data seizure, arguing that the warrant was overly broad. The judge disagreed. When you build a fortress around silence, you can't complain when someone brings a spotlight. As the session resumed, one of Combs's former collaborators was spotted leaving the courthouse under federal escort. Sources confirmed she had delivered a sworn affidavit and multiple physical exhibits. By noon, cable networks cut into regular programming. Live feeds from outside the courthouse showed protesters, some survivors holding signs. One read, "You can't remix the truth." Later in the afternoon, the prosecution called a financial analyst specializing in luxury assets and shell companies. He outlined a network of holdings tied to Combs, suggesting that funds were moved through layered trusts to finance private gatherings, influence payments, and in some cases hush money. The analyst's testimony was supported by records from international banks, flight manifests, and luxury property rentals. What had started as a celebrity scandal now had the outline of a RICO case. The defense attempted to shift focus, implying the witnesses were disgruntled or opportunistic. But the volume and consistency of the new testimony made that narrative harder to sustain. Outside the court, journalists speculated whether federal prosecutors would offer a plea deal or pursue full charges. A legal scholar told CNN they're not building a trial, they're building a takedown. Judge Hammond ended the day with a statement that echoed through the gallery. This court no longer deals in rumor. It deals in records, and those records are arriving by the hour. Combs exited through a side entrance. For the first time since the trial began, he did not respond to questions. His spokesperson issued a brief statement. "Mr. Combs maintains his innocence. We will respond in court." But in the public eye, the narrative had moved on. What began as isolated allegations was now framed as systemic abuse, orchestrated through influence, money, and intimidation. Manhattan. As the federal trial against Sean Diddy Combs entered day 12, prosecutors intensified their strategy. The courtroom transformed from a battleground of statements to a repository of evidence. The Department of Justice, now treating the case as part of a broader criminal enterprise investigation, began introducing a new class of witness insiders turned informants. One such witness, a former executive assistant identified only as MC, for her safety testified behind a privacy screen. Her voice, though filtered through distortion equipment, was steady. She described detailed accounts of how Combs's team managed VIP guests' financial kickbacks and what she referred to as compliance conditioning for newcomers. "It started as favors," she said. "Then those turned into obligations. After a while, it was understood you played by the rules or disappeared." MC detailed handwritten schedules, handwritten payoffs, and burner phone instructions that she claimed were used to coordinate movement and silence. She stated she was offered a severance package with a non-disclosure clause that included a clause preventing cooperation with law enforcement. The courtroom reaction was immediate. The defense objected to the admissibility of her severance documents. The judge allowed them in, citing the precedent for coercion-based clauses being examined under RICO statutes. Federal agents corroborated her claims by submitting samples of NDAs and severance templates obtained during a previous raid on a Beverly Hills property tied to one of Combs's holding companies. These documents revealed consistent language patterns used to suppress testimony. Outside the courtroom, pressure continued to build. Multiple entertainment attorneys were subpoenaed, some of whom had drawn up these agreements. Investigators began combing through communication records and retainer contracts, linking them to key figures in the case. That afternoon, a digital forensics expert presented a timeline of data deletions on several devices believed to be connected to Combs's associates. The deletions were described as precisely timed and executed remotely occurring hours after subpoenas had been issued. The expert confirmed that cloud backups had captured a portion of the erased material, now recovered and submitted as evidence. In one document, prosecutors highlighted correspondence referencing payouts to artists and staff in exchange for silence. Another file included audio logs of internal meetings discussing potential legal threats and media leaks. One voice believed to be Combs can be heard stating, "We control the doors. We control the stories." The defense attempted to downplay the recordings, suggesting the voice was imitated or manipulated, but voice authentication specialists confirmed its consistency with previous verified samples. As news of the recordings broke, music publications and entertainment brands began scrubbing articles and promotional content tied to Combs. Public perception continued its shift. One editor of a leading culture magazine tweeted, "Every day in court, the distance between icon and criminal shrinks." Media coverage intensified. Nightly cable programs dedicated entire segments to dissecting courtroom audio. Panelists included legal experts, former employees, and pop culture analysts who collectively acknowledged the breadth of the case was unlike anything seen since the fall of other major figures in media. On day 13th, prosecutors introduced a new witness, a former private pilot who had flown Combs and his entourage across international routes. He testified about specific chartered flights that included unnamed guests sealed manifests and flight paths diverted to private islands. The pilot said his job wasn't just to fly, it was to forget. He provided flight logs and customs documents. Prosecutors highlighted discrepancies between the manifest and surveillance photos from one international airport. They alleged that several individuals on board were trafficked without proper documentation. By midday, the judge called for an extended recess to review new classified materials submitted under protective seal. Rumors circulated that international agencies were now coordinating with U.S. prosecutors. As court adjourned for the day, protesters outside grew in number and volume. Their signs read, "Industry doesn't mean immunity and no more shadows." Combs left through a back exit without comment. His legal team issued another brief statement denying all allegations. But inside the courtroom, momentum had changed. Witnesses were no longer scared, they were organized. The wall of silence was not only cracking, it was collapsing. Manhattan. As day 14 of the trial against Sean Diddy Combs commenced, the tone shifted decisively. What began as a sensational celebrity case had evolved into a full-scale judicial reckoning. The prosecution introduced the most damning evidence, yet first-hand accounts, financial records, and direct communications, implicating Combs not only in abuse, but in efforts to obstruct justice. The morning session opened with testimony from an unnamed creative director, granted anonymity due to ongoing threats. He described his tenure inside Combs's media empire as controlled chaos with clear boundaries, cross them and you disappear. The witness spoke of detailed vetting protocols, non-disclosure briefings, and surveillance that extended beyond work hours. He recalled being present when Kutcher first broke ranks years ago, raising concerns in private meetings that were quickly silenced. Ashton was told to stick to sitcoms, he said. That's a quote. One major revelation emerged, a group chat archive spanning years, recovered from an encrypted platform. The messages allegedly included exchanges between Combs and several associates referencing payouts, coercive tactics, and specific names now listed as government witnesses. Federal agents authenticated the messages, citing device-level access logs. The content included code phrases, mentions of parties held under lock protocol, and references to influencers who were paid to discredit accusers online. Prosecutors presented this as evidence of a coordinated campaign to control narratives and suppress legal exposure. The defense objected to the use of group messages, citing privacy infringement and lack of consent. The court overruled. The defense cannot argue suppression while objecting to the light that reveals it, Judge Hammond said. In the afternoon, a former entertainment lawyer for Bad Boy Records took the stand. Her testimony was delivered under subpoena after resisting cooperation for weeks. She stated under oath that she was instructed to draft NDAs tailored not to protect intellectual property, but to silence whistleblowers. She also described being part of a legal team that advised Diddy's circle on how to avoid triggering law enforcement interest when transferring funds. I told them what they were doing wasn't legal. They told me that wasn't the point, she testified. Her documents marked confidential were submitted into evidence. Among them, memos from internal legal reviews, noting risk assessments for uncontrolled leaks, and a crisis communication playbook with specific directives to deflect and reframe using celebrity influencers. That evening, outside the courthouse, mainstream news programs dedicated primetime coverage to the trial. Major sponsors began pulling out of Combs-affiliated ventures. One luxury fashion house terminated its partnership. Another canceled an upcoming campaign. In a separate development, federal prosecutors confirmed that a grand jury was reviewing evidence for potential additional charges, including conspiracy and witness tampering. Legal observers called the development a sign that authorities were widening the scope beyond Combs himself. On day 15, the court heard from a whistleblower within a payment processing firm. She presented data showing unusual financial routing involving offshore accounts. Some transfers were labeled as consulting or promotional fees, but were sent to shell companies, traced back to private properties used for exclusive gatherings. A document submitted into evidence listed monthly payouts exceeding $400,000 in discretionary transactions with vague or non-existent service descriptions. During cross-examination, the defense argued that high-profile figures often use complex financial structures. The prosecution responded that these structures only became active during peak periods of media scrutiny. To conclude, the day prosecutors submitted a new witness list, nearly 24 names, comprising past collaborators, assistants, and consultants ready to testify. Some were scheduled for upcoming sessions. Others were waiting for new protections. In a final comment, the lead prosecutor told the court, "What we're exposing isn't just one man's misconduct. It's a machine designed to erase it." Combs, who had remained stone-faced throughout most of the trial, was seen whispering urgently to his attorneys. For the first time, his team did not address the press outside. Day 16 began under heavy security. The witness list had leaked overnight, sparking online speculation and real-world consequences. 2 scheduled witnesses requested emergency relocation after receiving threats. Federal marshals confirmed enhanced protective measures were being deployed. The morning session opened with an unexpected turn, a sealed testimony unsealed. It belonged to a former private events coordinator, referred to as JD, who had worked with Combs for over a decade. The testimony previously submitted in closed proceedings was now read aloud in full. JD outlined a structure of private events organized under dummy companies to avoid scrutiny. She testified about meetings held in foreign jurisdictions, non-disclosure arrangements, signed under duress, and detailed planning that included hiring staff, instructed to observe, but not speak. She described one trip to the Caribbean involving multiple guests who were not allowed to bring phones or speak to staff. These weren't parties, she said. They were operations. The testimony was supported by travel manifests, email chains, and calendar schedules marked with pseudonyms. Prosecutors alleged the trips were central to Combs's broader system of coercion, used to isolate, impress, and control. That afternoon, another financial analyst took the stand to expand on previous testimony. She described how funds were layered through art auctions, fashion partnerships, and offshore charities. One trail led to a $2.3 million transaction labeled as a donation, which prosecutors claim was used to pay off a key figure in a pending civil suit. Judge Hammond interrupted the session to clarify that the trial was no longer simply about abuse allegations. It now encompassed financial fraud, tax evasion, and obstruction of justice. By midday, the media coverage had exploded. A scheduled press event by one of Combs's companies was abruptly canceled. Celebrity guests cited scheduling conflicts, while behind the scenes, PR consultants scrambled to manage fallout. Outside court activists gathered in larger numbers. Many were survivors of unrelated cases, now rallying around the broader theme, silence and power. One sign read, "This isn't about gossip, this is about justice." On day 17, prosecutors called in a digital security expert. He explained how certain phones used by Combs's team had military-grade encryption and remote wipe features, triggered by GPS location. The court reviewed text message backups, showing directives like erase all no guests with devices and keep Ashton out. The final phrase stirred the courtroom. It was the clearest confirmation yet that Ashton Kutcher's involvement had been discussed internally and targeted. Prosecutors stated that this evidence confirmed efforts to sideline or intimidate potential whistleblowers. Combs's legal team objected, arguing that the texts were taken out of context, but the court admitted them, citing their timing and corroboration with other testimonies. Meanwhile, a leak to the press confirmed that 2 more states had opened inquiries into financial structures connected to Combs. Federal coordination was underway. One former DOJ official stated, "This is entering unprecedented territory for a celebrity case." In a related revelation, a documentary filmmaker submitted footage captured during a promotional shoot that included off-the-record remarks by Combs. The clip, authenticated and time-stamped, captured him laughing about owning silence and keeping the noise low. It was played in court. The room fell silent. By the end of day 17, legal commentators noted that what once seemed like a high-profile trial was turning into a landmark investigation into systemic abuse wrapped in celebrity culture. The final blow of the day came not from the prosecution, but from the market. Two publicly traded entertainment firms distanced themselves from Combs's ventures, citing shareholder risk. One statement read, "We no longer consider this a reputational issue. It is now a liability issue." Combs exited the courthouse behind a wall of security. He did not speak. But he didn't need to. His silence was no longer strategy, it was survival. Day 18 of the federal trial against Sean Diddy Combs opened under a national spotlight. For the first time, the Department of Justice confirmed the formation of a multi-agency task force to investigate broader allegations linked to the case. The move signaled that Combs's legal troubles had moved beyond the courtroom and into systemic exposure. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was expectant. The prosecution began the day with a final batch of witnesses, several named individuals who had remained anonymous until protective measures were finalized. Their stories, though independent, painted a coherent narrative of fear leverage and silence weaponized over decades. One witness, a former creative producer, testified about a project halted after Kutcher raised internal concerns years prior. Emails showed that once Kutcher voiced discomfort, meetings were canceled, and he was quietly removed from the roster. He was right, the producer told the court. But the machine didn't want right. It wanted control. The defense pushed back, suggesting these narratives were emotionally charged and circumstantial. But the prosecution's final presentation was not built on emotion. It was built on data. Visuals traced financial networks, digital trails, and a coordinated media defense infrastructure involving dozens of consultants, bots, and hired influencers. Charts showed a timeline. Every major accusation was followed by payouts, media spin, and aggressive legal threats. A prosecutor summarized, "We are not prosecuting fame. We are prosecuting the abuse of power and the industrial effort to conceal it." Midday, a closed-door session was requested by federal attorneys. When proceedings resumed, it was announced that international warrants had been issued related to offshore entities tied to Combs's network. Reporters noted a shift in Combs's posture, more alert, more reactive. He passed handwritten notes to attorneys. His lead counsel requested a private audience with the judge. The trial broke briefly. Outside, a storm gathered literally and figuratively. As rain fell across lower Manhattan, federal agents escorted a high-level former executive from Combs's business arm into the building. Her cooperation, described as full and verified, was reportedly conditional on prosecutorial immunity. She delivered hundreds of internal documents, memos, signed contracts, hidden audit reports. One document revealed an internal classification system ranking associates by exposure risk. Kutcher's name was marked Tier 1. Others listed were already on the witness roster. This revelation led to an impromptu security review for all scheduled witnesses. Courtroom officials confirmed several sessions would now move to closed hearings to prevent external interference. By day 19, the trial no longer felt like a celebrity scandal. It resembled a federal takedown. Activists, legal scholars, and former DOJ officials described it as a benchmark in accountability culture. Cable networks ran continuous analysis. A special Senate committee quietly requested internal DOJ briefings on the handling of the case. During closing statements, the prosecution delivered its final message. Power isn't the crime. The silence around it is. The courtroom was hushed. The defense argued selective prosecution, media manipulation, and an unfair bias toward public sentiment. But jurors had seen more than headlines. They had seen ledgers, flight logs, NDAs, burner phones, internal memos, and unfiltered audio. Deliberation began on day 20. Outside, the courthouse lines formed hours before opening. Some held signs, others just watched. By mid-afternoon, a verdict had not yet been reached. But even before the judgment was announced, the reckoning had landed. Contracts terminated, music pulled, statements retracted, collaborators reevaluated. No one looked to Combs for leadership, not anymore. As the courtroom empties and the cameras turn away, the case of Sean Diddy Combs leaves behind more than a shattered legacy. It leaves a defining imprint on the balance between fame, accountability, and silence. The sheer scale of the allegations and the volume of evidence presented in the federal case mark a historic threshold. What began with whispers of impropriety evolved into the unmasking of a system built on silence money and manufactured image. Kutcher's pivotal decision to testify cracked a dam of restraint, allowing a flood of corroboration to follow. From burner phones to blacklists, encrypted messages, to offshore transfers, the case became a referendum on celebrity impunity. In the broader cultural context, the trial redefined what it means to hold power accountable in the age of virality and media saturation. For decades, Combs was untouchable, a symbol not just of hip-hop royalty, but of entrepreneurial success. He transcended music to become a brand, an image, an institution. But as the trial revealed, behind that brand was an infrastructure of control, contracts, handlers, intimidation, legal fog. This case is now more than a prosecution, it's precedent. For whistleblowers, it's a rare example of testimony gaining traction and protection. For industry gatekeepers, it's a warning liability. Doesn't end with association, it begins there. For prosecutors, it underscores a turning point, where celebrity is no longer a shield, but a subject of scrutiny. Yet the conversation is just beginning. What will happen to the companies once tied to Combs? Will there be civil suits to follow? Will regulatory bodies take a closer look at how wealth and influence enable systemic abuse, not just in music, but across entertainment, tech, and politics? Perhaps most importantly, the case challenges a cultural assumption, long left unchecked, that power when dressed as talent and charisma gets a pass. That silence buys safety. That celebrity can outpace truth. It cannot, not anymore. The reckoning wasn't just Combs's, it was the industry's. And as the dust settles, the question that remains is not whether others will fall, but how many were part of the same machine and how long it will take before we hear their names.